we're in the very nascent stages of what unmanned system threats are going to look like. The department's going to have to invest in this in perpetuity. And I made this statement before us.
Brice Cooper is a former Green Beret with 25 years of incredible experience in product management, congressional affairs, and military operations. Now serving as the Chief Strategy Officer at Allen Control Systems, Brice brings a wealth of knowledge and a unique perspective to the evolving landscape of drone warfare.
So where do you think we are with Group 3 Interceptors then? Like as a nation, think we're pretty good to go?
I would say we're on.
Well, this is the challenge of a startup. Everyone knows the problem's coming, but maybe the problem's not fully there yet.
You know, I think this is more for a government challenge. Historically, we've always waited until it's a problem. Not until lots of soldiers were being killed did the department shift and hyper-focus on either EW systems or vehicles that were survivable.
You're going to need some gun turrets. We're probably going to need some EW. We might need our own swarm, some interceptors. I mean, that's a big threat, and it's scary.
The Ukrainians, in some aspects, or actually in a lot, have been much more innovative than the U.S. is.
Like, this is the one issue that matters right now.
The drone wars have begun.
Brice Cooper, welcome on to the studio.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming up to Alexandria. How'd you get started in the Army?
Geez, it was 1999, May 5th. Wasn't doing so well in school and had to find a way to pay for college. So enlisted in the West Virginia National Guard, and they were paying 100% tuition. I said, that sounds good to me.
That was nice. That's similar to my Navy story. My dad said, if you want to go out of state of Mississippi, you need to get a scholarship.
Yep.
And then I was like, well, my big sister's in the Navy, so I guess I'll join the Navy. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so take me back to when you were what do they call it, a cadet? No, it's not a cadet. It's midshipman in the Navy. What is it in the Army?
Yeah, so I enlisted as a private, and then after 9/11 happened, I was still in college. I joined ROTC because I was like, well, I really don't know what I want to do, but this Army thing seems kind of cool. So I was a cadet in ROTC, similar to you, but also was in the National Guard at the same time, finished school, and got commissioned after that in 2003.
Cool. And then right into procurement, right? No, just kidding. What did you do next? Yeah.
No, so the way the Army works is they make sure that you spend the first couple of years in the operational force. You get an understanding of, the technologies and the tactics and, how soldiers are using equipment. So I first came in as an infantry officer, and wife and I moved to Germany and spent a 3-year assignment there. Spent a year of that in Iraq, in Ramadi at the height of the surge of the war, and then left there. Had always wanted to go into Special Forces on the Army side, be a Green Beret. And so they actually let me go a couple months early straight from Iraq to what's now Fort Liberty for Special Forces selection. Which was great mentally. I got to leave combat, and regardless of how bad it was in North Carolina, made it through selection, and then started into my special operations career for a couple of years. And about halfway through my 20-year career, had switched to the acquisition community and did some work there.
Okay, so wait, let's back up though. Green Beret.
Yep.
So that's not, as a Navy guy, I was, obviously familiar with the SEALs.
Sure.
What are the Green Berets like? How many Green Berets are there?
Oh, shoot. I don't know, but it's the largest special operations force within the U.S. military in terms of number of people.
Okay.
So, across the special operations community, each of the services have kind of unique missions. The SEALs have theirs. Mm-hmm. Green Berets have traditionally been the experts at unconventional warfare. Subjectively, they'll say we're, jacks of all trades, master of none. And the idea is that you go in and work with an indigenous population and an organization to, defeat somebody that's not so friendly to the U.S.
So, like in the Navy, when I was coming out and getting my commission, it's like you either go surface warfare, you go submarines, or you go like pilot. And my eyes were too bad for pilot, obviously. So, what are like the different MODs or modality? What is it called? What do they call it? Like the different type of billets you could have in the Green Berets?
Well, at least for the Army, they call it an MOS, military occupational specialty. But there are a couple within Army Special Forces, which are the Green Berets. But for an officer, there's just one. You come in as a detachment commander.
Okay.
You spend a couple years there, and then you have to leave your organization for a broadening assignment. Go back to Big Army or somewhere else in a headquarters for a little bit of time. And that's usually when officers decide I want to stay with the Green Berets or I want to go to other places within Special Operations Command, another selection to another unit, or you look for opportunities to serve in the Army other places, which I did.
Okay, so that's the next step.
Yep.
You transitioned into what?
Transitioned in the Army Acquisition Corps. So part of it is I knew when it comes time to retire, I needed some skill sets that would transition well into into just about any industry.
Yeah.
And so there are functional areas in the Army. One of them is the Acquisition Corps, where you get to lead weapon systems development programs, or you could go be a defense attaché somewhere. But I figured this was a way that I could continue to serve and get some skill sets that would easily transfer into the private sector down the road.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
When did you get to Tampa?
So
Is that after the DC?
Yeah, so I've actually had 2 assignments at SOCOM. First one was my second acquisition assignment. I was leading vehicle programs there. And then I left for about 3 years, went up to DC, spent some time on the Hill and in the Pentagon, and then came back down to SOCOM in the job I just left, running counter-drone programs.
Oh, nice. Okay, before we get to drones, because I know it's a drone show, but vehicle programs.
Sure.
There's a lot of startups out there doing autonomous vehicles now.
Mm-hmm.
When you were working on those programs, were you working on like the bigger vehicles or what or the small vehicles? Like what kind of vehicles?
There was a range of them, but the one that took up my most time was SOCOM's replacement for the Humvee. It was a ground mobility vehicle. So it was a lighter tactical vehicle.
Okay.
This was 2015 to 2018. So we were just ahead of any kind of autonomy efforts for the most part, starting to hear about it in the labs and people that live in the science and technology communities.
The stuff that you worked on is actually fielded now.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And now they're working on replacing those with maybe more autonomous, or not replacing, augmenting them with some autonomous vehicles?
I mean, there's interest within the government. I don't think that any of the actual offices or the program offices have taken any tangible steps to replace vehicles. I know the Army is looking at a couple of autonomous efforts and working on those. But
all right, what's your take, just like real talk, on autonomous vehicles in the battlefield? I need the SOCOM DD here.
I think there's a place for them, but I don't think the department as a whole figured out exactly how we employ those and then how we sustain those. The department realizes this is where the future is going, and slowly trying to figure out how these get inserted into the formations.
What's the mission? Like, what are they doing? I guess they're just driving around on the front line doing what?
I think each service is looking at it differently. The Army's got some very big programs. For SOCOM, I think ideally anything that's autonomous is just trying to minimize the burden on the operator so you can enhance their lethality. So largely, any talk of it has been in the space of, resupply, augmenting the vehicles, being able to carry more gear. But that's generally where I think the space has been. So
you can enhance their lethality.
Sure.
That sounds badass. I like that. Yeah, you give them more time.
Sure.
So the vehicle chapter was over, and then you jumped to counter drone, or how did that work?
So after I left SOCOM's vehicle program office, I went up to Congress. The Army has a congressional fellowship program where they take about 25 officers and insert them into congressional offices. So 2019, I spent a year up there supporting a member of Congress, and then had to leave after a year and then spend 2 years in the Pentagon working legislative affairs. And then after that, I went down to SOCOM for the drone programs.
The drone program had probably seemed pretty exciting to you. I'm assuming, since you're now at a startup working on counter-drone stuff. But.
Yeah, it did. There was a very small window. It was very unlikely for me to go down there. So it was a real blessing to get the opportunity to go down there. But the office has got a broad portfolio, but anything for counter-unmanned systems was very much a priority for any organization in the department. So the opportunity to work with the team, and especially at SOCOM that moves very quickly, it was a wonderful experience to kind of get after and see where the gaps and opportunities are.
That makes sense. Now, I know we talked about this a lot off air, but essentially a lot of the early work was working on getting products to counter Group 3, like larger drones, right?
Yep.
A couple questions there. First one, is this procurement and finding these products really for our forces, or are we buying these and helping other countries get the American products? Like, how do you guys view splitting, where do you supply those resources, or
so I can only speak to my experience specifically, but the primary responsibility is to get it into the hands of SOF. Now, if there is a use for it for our partners and allies, then that's great. And obviously from an industry perspective, that's a good opportunity for business. So there were always times where we were sharing where we were going with our programs with partners, especially on the NATO side. And sometimes there was some interest, from them. They were also pursuing some of their own efforts, and there was more of a collaborative information sharing just to see where everybody was going in development.
So where do you think we are with Group 3 interceptors then? Like as a nation, think we're pretty good to go?
I would say we're on the right footing. And so I'll just back up. When I was down at SOCOM the first time, it was the first time we started seeing drones, small Group 1 commercial things. And then when I came back into the office, things quickly escalated from that into the Group 3 one-way attacks that we were seeing in the Middle East. And so as a whole, the broader community tried to accelerate technologies as fast as they can. But I would say there's a number of decent candidates that are in that space that the department has on good footing in terms of what capabilities that they've got there.
Yeah. So Group 3 one-way attack. And our solution is to effectively, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, send either a missile at it or another Group 3 that detonates it.
That's
right?
generally where you're kind of in the space.
So then I guess when you war game that out, does that mean that it's just whichever country is richer in the long run? Because you're kind of one-to-one killing them, right?
True.
That makes sense. I mean, I think we're richer, usually.
Sure.
So I think we got them.
Yeah, it becomes a number game for sure in terms of who can scale quicker and how much money the adversary or us and our partners can pump into countermeasures.
Yeah, maybe there's room for kind of an interceptor that's like 80K or like maybe 60K or something that shoots down. Like a Shahed I've heard is anywhere from like 40 to 250. I mean, you've heard lots of different numbers. Let's just call it 200,000 for the purposes of this podcast. So I guess if we're making interceptors that are the same price, then we're breaking even with the enemy, which is good, right? Because we're richer than them long term. Is that is that the thoughts of?
Yeah, but I think it's always going to be a more expensive proposition because you're talking about hitting something that's moving, flying through the sky. That all it has to do is hit something that's stationary and it's a large object. That's always going to be a cheaper proposition.
You're saying it's easier to attack?
Of course. Okay. Yeah, it's going to be much harder to always defend.
Yeah.
And that's where you get back into the defense in depth. There's kinetic solutions, electronic warfare solutions, and all of them have a place. But where these interceptors are really trying to do is reach out and touch some of these threats, further out before they even get in close.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm asking these questions. I truly don't know, where the Group 3 battle is going. I right now, to me, it looks like we're matching enemy Group 3s with our own type of Group 3s. It seems like where it's going. And then it's just a game of who can be the most efficient manufacturers, kind of.
There's efforts, whether it's high energy, lasers, directed energy solutions.
Oh, yeah,
trying
see
to
that blue Halo one.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I want to see that in action.
All of them have their own plus and minuses. All of them have their own gaps. I think, on the government side, we were looking at everything. Everything was on the table, and then cost becomes, some kind of the burden and how quickly you can turn a solution out that's effective.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess we'll have to see where it heads. And you guys worked on a gun, right? The Mace AGT.
We did work with Northrop, looking at, applying that for soft use. Good system, saw some success, and so they're continuing to look at that as an option. But it's challenging when you're talking about direct fire weapon systems. Ideally you want something that's not incredibly expensive.
I'm pretty optimistic about a product like that in general because it can go long range. If they work on the control systems, it can probably hit the targets reliably. I guess the one thing is you're shooting bullets really far into the air, so that maybe there's some danger on the backside if you miss.
Sure. Yeah.
But I do think in general that is a promising avenue, and we should do more investment there. On the big gun side.
Yeah, it's definitely a tool, in the kit. The way that my old office was looking at it was, CRAMs, counter-rocket, artillery mortar systems, a lot of lead into the air. They're expensive systems, heavy demand. And so we were looking for solutions that provided kind of that interim or near-term defense, for some of those threats.
Okay, and then we met finally. We find both of our long story arcs. We finally met, crossed paths, talking about Group 1 and Group 2 threats.
Yep.
I don't know exactly when it was, but probably like 9 months ago or something. Jack, can you pull up the latest Beth Jezos or whatever the one was, the Twitter one we saw? Oh, yeah. Yeah, Beth here.
Yep.
Okay, so this is what we're up against now. Not exactly the Shahed, but, we got, how many? This is 10,000 drones, right?
Yeah, it just shows you how quickly it's escalating. If you watched, the Winter Olympics in South Korea, they had a drone show, and that was years ago. Just how quickly this is.
Now, some people say
maturing.
like, "Oh, this isn't that scary because this is all pre-programmed. They're not autonomous. They had plenty of time to work on this and make this show." But I don't know. It's pretty scary to me.
What I thought was scary is 2 years ago, there's a video from a university in China, and it shows little drones independently navigating, but navigating together through bamboo.
Oh, yeah. We had that one on the podcast last.
And that was 2 years ago.
That's wild. Yeah, just going through. Yeah, but something like this, I mean, this is a lot of drones. Now, I don't necessarily think the battlefield's going to have maybe that many drones on the battlefield, but there's the fact that it can do this for a fireworks show.
Yep.
Or, sorry, a drone show. Shows that, like, the capability is out there. And so, yeah, we linked up originally to start talking about the Group 1 threat, and we kind of surveyed the land. I think we both collectively, independently of meeting, surveyed the landscape. And guys, talk to me about like what you had been seeing out there.
So, when I mentioned before in terms of how quickly the technology shifted from Group 1s to Group 3s, then when Ukraine happened, just hyper accelerated everything back to Group 3. I mean, for me, this is just my own personal statement. We already had solutions in the electronic warfare space that we were comfortable on how they were performing against Group 1s. And so we weren't interested in pursuing investments there. But when things really started to transition to those first-person view drones, and if you're watching anything online for these FPVs that are destroying armor in Ukraine, it was scary because how easy it was for them to do that, which was not a primary target before. Usually it was fixed sites. Now it is just to open the aperture for what targets are. And, EW solutions are a tool, but I would say in general, they're moderately effective.
Yeah. And now it's like these little drones can hit artillery. They can hit tank. They're getting by the defenses.
Yep.
And so now we're looking for new stuff, huh?
Yeah. And there are a number of people online, pundits, experts that have talked about limitations as they currently stand. But I think anybody would be naive to think that you can't snap a chalk line today and say, this is the best the technology is going to get. It's too cheap for people to continue to make these more and more lethal. So, identifying solutions that really get after these smaller drones, I think for anybody in the industry space is critical.
Okay, before we talk about how sweet Bullfrog is, I had the Neros founder, Olaf, on last podcast, and we talked about their drone swarms.
Yep.
One of the things he would say is that the only way to combat, it's back to what we were saying about offense is easier than defense sometimes. Mm-hmm. He was saying like you have to have just a bigger drone swarm to deter against the enemy's drone swarm. Did you guys look at that kind of stuff? That was a different organization?
No, I mean, it's something we had thought, but the concept of employing a drone swarm at scale for units just is not in a defensive posture, or at least in a response to it. It was hard to understand how that would work.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got to launch a bunch of these. So if you've got a light unit like special operations is, where are you going to carry all these? Maybe that's what your autonomous platform is for.
Potentially. Yeah, there we go. We're really solving the problems here right on Drone Wars. Well, I guess what he was saying is somehow there'd be like a wall. Well, this is not for special ops, I guess, more for like defending an area.
Yeah.
They just have a persistent swarm that's up, and they come and some of them come down and charge, and some of them replace it.
Sure.
It's like a persistent wall, but I don't know if that's necessarily what's going to happen, but that's what I guess they would posit.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on what context you view this. If it is a Ukraine scenario where it is total war and you're not worried about anything else, then it makes sense. Where the U.S. finds itself in a lot of places are host nations.
Yep.
And I don't think a lot of our partners would appreciate drones just flying persistently in the air.
Yeah. Speaking to kinetic killing then, because how we met and
Yep.
what had you join Allen Control Systems is, the promise of an autonomous gun to shoot down 10,000 drones. But that's a lot of drones for one gun. So what do we think about that?
Well, I mean, you could scale this on a number of systems. What was so interesting to me was, one, it's doing what no other system is now, which doesn't require an operator to sit there and get any kind of target reticle, the gun reticle on a target and manually shoot. The gun was doing all of that. It was also at a price that was affordable, at least in the drone space, to scale. Nothing was really at the cost that we were talking about in terms of kinetic effectors. They were 100 times more expensive than what we were looking at.
That makes sense. Yeah, I really think I know this is like cliche to say, but for something like 10,000 drones coming at you, it really is going to be like a layered defense.
Yeah.
It's cliche, but like you're going to need some gun turrets. We're probably going to need some EW. We might need our own swarm, some interceptors. I mean, that's a big threat.
Yep.
And it's scary. And I don't, I hate reading the comments in Twitter, but like some people will say like, has a drone swarm ever been even used in battle yet? That's what they'll say, like the Twitter trolls.
Sure.
And
yet is the operative word.
The truth is in some ways they're right. Obviously we haven't seen it yet, but it's coming.
Yeah.
At least we think it's coming.
Why wouldn't you use that? I mean, we spend billions on weapon systems, and you don't even need to put payloads on these for it to be disruptive.
Yeah, that's actually the crazy thing is like the ones with payload, we know this from our own target practice at our range. When you put a 2 kilogram explosive or 3 kilogram explosive payload on one of these little drones, they move very lethargically. Like these are pretty slow devices. They're easy to hit with the gun at that point. But when you have no payload, they're very fast.
Yep.
And so I was thinking the best swarm is kind of like a mixture, They have like some of them that are just like kind of driving around trying to mess up the gun.
Yeah.
And we're like I was telling Luke this actually, our like vision system needs to pick up the ones that are the threats within the swarm because, I don't think they're going to put bombs on all of them.
Nope.
I think they'll have some that are like decoys and then some that are like communications only.
Yep.
And then some that are like the explosives. So you kind of just want to pick them apart.
Yeah, I think just the U.S. as a whole is generally kind of naive how quickly this can escalate. We are not. I don't think the U.S. is seeing a whole lot of use of decoys personally, but I know they are in Ukraine. And how are we going to deal with those when it's so inexpensive? Now you're comboing Group 3 one-way attacks with small drones. What systems go after what? It's complicated very quickly.
Well, this is the challenge of a startup. Is that you can bring a new innovation and forget defense, any industry. You can be ahead and have a new innovation, but maybe the problem, everyone knows the problem's coming, but maybe the problem's not fully there yet. And it's that the area in between that a startup's trying to live through effectively. Yeah. That's not exactly the valley of death. That's a separate thing. Yep. It's a separate topic, but it's similar.
I think this is more for a government challenge. Historically, we've always waited until it's a problem. The IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Not until lots of soldiers were being killed did the department shift and hyper-focus on, either EW systems or vehicles that were survivable. There are some in the department, some organizations that are really quick to identify ahead of need some of these, but I think, largely, and these are just Brice's opinions, the services in general just have a harder time pivoting as quickly as we need to. And so that makes it challenging for startups to say, hey, we see the opportunity in terms of where some of the gaps or needed capability would be, but the department hasn't fully realized that yet.
Yeah, for disclaimer, these are obviously all Brice's opinions. Yeah. This is also not investment advice, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, of course. Okay, so then we've got Kinetic Solution. You're now at the Chief Strategy Officer of Allen Control Systems, for people who don't know that. We're very excited to have you on the team. We're a bunch of Navy guys at the helm, so having someone who was in SOCOM in the Army and a Green Beret for a product like this, really helps out, so welcome. What are your thoughts on back to the autonomous vehicle, merging it with the autonomous gun, and it just drives around shooting this stuff? Is that kind of where it's going, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think that's a possibility. A lot of it's going to be driven on what the comfort level is for DoD in terms of how much autonomy they allow and how much they want, a person in the loop. I think everybody is struggling what that looks like. How does it get employed? I'm sure there are organizations that are doing all kinds of wargaming and playing around with it. I know Project Convergence with the Army is trying to figure some of those out.
So we get a lot of startups that watch this podcast, a lot of startup founders, and some of them new to the game, some of them that weren't in the military like we were, but have an innovation. What would be Brice's advice to a fresh startup with a new innovation in engaging the government?
That's a
tough question. Tough question.
That's a tough one because I think we're really lucky here that there's an immediate product market fit, and that's partly why I wanted to come here.
It wasn't just because of how beautiful I am.
Yeah, well, I mean, Steve's convincing. So the best thing they can do is try to get with organizations that they want to potentially sell to and understand where they're going. I think some startups really struggle with, I've got a great idea, but I don't understand the Department of Defense, and I'm not even talking about the acquisition process, just what the need is and would there be any interest in it. And it's hard to get that information, but I know there's a lot of people in DoD that are willing to share those. And unfortunately, there's a couple of, whether they're the AFWorks, the SOFWorks, all kinds of places in DIU where you can try to get that information. But my bottom line is trying to get somebody who's working in that space, leading those, a program office, a requirements generating organization that can give you some advice. And a lot of times they'll give you just free advice like, hey, I see a place for this, or I really don't.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, one of the things I've noticed so far in starting this company is those organizations you mentioned, these people are very busy right now.
Yep.
Like busier than maybe they've ever been. I think there's a flurry of new companies hitting them up. If we're sending emails, that means there's 100 other companies probably sending them the same emails. And so they're very busy right now. They only have so many hours in the day. So it's like really kind of hard to get their attention.
Very much so.
And on top of that, their priorities were set years ago.
Sure.
And they take years to see those through. So I think one of the challenges I've seen so far is just cutting through that noise, trying to get their attention. And even if then when you do that, then the next step is your product has to be a good idea.
Yep.
And then they still have to find a way to slot it into their workload, which is already packed. I mean, when was that? I think you were still at SOCOM, but we went for Soft Week, and you showed me like the spreadsheet of their calendars. Basically, they didn't even have it on their calendar. They had like a separate like spreadsheet of like all the meetings they had.
Yeah.
And
back
it was
to
just
back.
fully back to back, just totally covered. They could maybe give every company like 10 minutes. It was wild.
Now, I'll give a shout out to SOCOM, at least on the acquisition arm. Everybody is very good and very interested in trying to find new capabilities that are going to fit on their technology transition roadmap, things that may fill gaps. I've talked to some friends who have, been in startups or have started a company on their own. I said, really what you need in the government is a sympathetic ear or a champion, somebody that recognizes and said, I might not know what the path is, but I'm interested in this and I think it has a place to go. It's just unfortunate. That's a hard thing to find. There's no like central funnel point, which everybody wants. It just doesn't exist.
No, and it's old fashioned. It's no different than any business.
That's
I think
true.
then it's just pound the phones, try to meet people, find your champion.
Yep.
And if your product is good, your champion will make it happen.
Yeah, and listen, there's plenty of shade to throw at, folks on the defense procurement side, but they respond to what pressures they're getting, just like anybody does in any business. If you're trying to execute your budget for the year and you've got your superiors just hounding you on X, Y, and Z, they're like, well, this new technology that could be beneficial in a couple of years, I don't have time to worry about that because I don't have money for it or I don't have a requirement. So,
and like that's something that maybe we could start writing a requirement for now, but it's not on a timeline that the startup might live.
Yeah.
Which is why actually this goes as my theory on why they like dual use, because then you can grow and be a business without the government.
Yeah.
That's my theory. Is like the government likes that in many ways because then they don't feel so bad if they have to wait 18 months because you still have your other business line. Which is why they prefer, in many cases, the dual-use companies.
Yeah, I don't know if I had any specific preference. I know that I felt more comfortable with companies that had other revenue streams because I knew that they had some stability, or even, more recently dealing with VC-backed startups, largely because I knew that they had capital to employ, and a lot of them, and it goes back to your earlier question, are just looking for some info or input from the government to help shape where the money was going, knowing that hopefully there was an on-ramp. So I think, whether it is dual use where they've got other, revenue streams for that so they can, stay solvent, or VC-backed companies that have money to, stay afloat.
Yeah. Our product's not well, there might be a consumer application, but it's not exactly dual use. It's meant to be a weapon of war. But I think that, obviously, we're in the VC-backed camp where we're backed by that kind of capital and the DoorDash money, so to speak. I just told Tony and Andy, we're going to put the logo on there. That's going to be good. Put that on the Bullfrog.
Yep.
Will the government allow that?
I like that. Who knows?
A little DoorDash
Somebody will
logo.
probably say no.
I think that it would be a nice touch, good pay homage. Maybe there's a consumer application too. I mean, it's just that the product's maybe a little too good for consumers. I don't think we can put it in their hands, actually. I go back and forth on it, but I think ranchers in Texas, might like it.
Sure. I mean, if you go to SHOT Show, I think we talked about this. There are all kind of military type technologies that people somehow put a commercial lens on it.
SHOT Show, Vegas, January. We're all going. Jack, you're going. We're all in. It's gonna be
good.
dope.
I've never been.
Okay, what about for startup advice for maybe selling to Ukraine or foreign military sales? Like, how do you see that?
I would say my experience is, the Ukrainians in some aspects, or actually in a lot, have been much more innovative than the U.S. is. And I think on some capabilities, not the big systems that you hear about that we send, have been disappointed in it. More those systems that are of commercial use that either did not go through a ton of paces here stateside in terms of testing, or even in Ukraine. And then when they get out to the battlefield, like any systems, they operate completely different. So my advice would be is that, if you want to start engaging Ukraine for potential use, just be very transparent on where the maturity is, because the worst thing you want to happen is you send a technology over there and it doesn't do well, and now your reputation is just destroyed, and it'll be hard to recover that over there.
Yeah, I mean, because they're actually in battle.
Yeah, it's very acute for them. They want to take it from the production line and put it right into combat, and there's very little tolerance for grifting or anything that says, hey, here's how great it is, and then come find out it doesn't.
What just Brice's thoughts, but how do you see, how's it going over there? What do you see? You've been following it closely, or?
Yeah, I follow like everybody does if they're reading the news or listening to a Ukraine-based podcast. It's tough. I think Ukraine's been very good at terms of managing their public profile in terms of how well or not the war is going.
Zelensky was just here in D.C., right?
Yeah. And went out to some production facilities up in Pennsylvania. And for such a small country in terms of like the behemoth that Russia at least marketed itself, it's been amazing on what they've been able to do with a lot of help from partners, like the U.S. and people in NATO and in the EU. But, it's pretty impressive what they've done so far, but it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. And obviously, like, the lines of the battle have changed a little bit over the last 9 months, but
not a ton.
Not a ton. No. I mean, it's pretty entrenched at this point.
Which I don't think is good for Ukraine. A war of attrition does not work well for the smaller junior partner in this.
That's more of a Russia thing.
Yeah.
That's their thing.
So I would say I'm personally hawkish on Ukraine. Whatever the U.S. can do to continue to support them, I think is what we should do.
Oh, man. Yeah, coming on here for your political thoughts here. This will be good. Let's go deep now. I think that mostly, if you talk to our co-founder, Luke, he would agree with you.
Yeah.
We got to help. I guess depending on where you draw the line, though, like I think Zelensky wanted to do like the long-range missiles and be able to use them deep into Russian territory. I think that's where currently we're drawing the line. I think that's what I saw in the news. I could be wrong. Is that right, Jack? You can check, but I think that's where we're currently at.
I think if you were to ask somebody in the military at the very beginning, is you don't put restrictions on it, right?
Yeah.
The benefit that Ukraine had would be the opportunity to employ mass, which they didn't have a ton of, or surprise. But we said, no, you can't go that far with it. And we were kind of slow rolling how much we were willing to give them. And I think that slow rolling just resulted in lives.
Yeah, I'm not an elected official or one of our leaders of foreign policy, but it's interesting how they choose these lines, or at least how I think they might choose them. Maybe it's like a risk of retaliation with nukes or tactical nukes.
Sure.
Not the big nukes, but like a tactical nuke.
Yeah.
Maybe that's like where we think. Is that
I think that's probably what it was.
It's got to be something like that, right?
How much can we test the water? How far can we push before we think Russia would respond in a manner that would just be totally incomprehensible? And I think a lot of our European partners have gotten to the point either I don't care that they escalate beyond something just terrible, or we don't think that they will, and so we're going to authorize the use of weapon systems beyond Ukraine's borders.
It's actually, I have a 2.5-year-old. You have kids that are older than mine. It's actually kind of terrifying right now, and in many ways, I think. Like, we have conflicts in the Middle East, maybe something in the Pacific soon. Got the Ukraine thing going on. Got our debts rising. All countries' debts are rising. It seems like it's kind of like the lead up to World War I was. Yeah. I'm not a history buff exactly, but it feels like something like that. And I just think that this time we all have nukes. So I don't know. This is like the most important company I thought I could work on after food delivery. Like,
Yeah.
basically,
And you
like,
guys could have just sat on your laurels.
I mean, I could
based
be
on that.
retired right
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
but I honestly, Luke and I looked at each other and were like, well, we should probably help in some way.
Yeah.
And we thought robotics and AI had gotten so good that we could make basically an autonomous weapon that's better than any gun out there before,
Yep.
and try to give that to our allies into the U.S. But if you look at all of the things happening in the news right now, I'm kind of scared, like in terms of like where it's all headed, and because like Russia might just throw a tactical nuke down,
Sure.
just to be like, hey, I'm mad at this missile you sent into my city. I'm gonna hit you with a tactical nuke. It's not a big nuke, so don't worry. But like that's the first step, I think this is like the one issue. Like if I was a single issue voter, like,
Yeah.
this is the one issue that matters right now. Like not all killing ourselves with nukes, basically.
I would think it would make sense. Hey, we deliver the equipment to Ukraine. How they decide to use it is up to them. I don't think there should be any conditions there.
At a minimum, I think that's great. I guess the only other side to like take the other side is just like, if we start doing real damage to them, will they send any?
Yeah, I
Will they
guess
escalate?
right. That's the
I
concern.
don't think, like, if I had to guess, I don't think they will. Like, I'm with you, but obviously we don't know.
Yeah, the question is how far can you put Putin into a corner before it's a response? A nuclear response. I don't know.
I don't think they're sending the big nukes, but they might a tactical nuke here or there, maybe. And then I'm not a war gamer either, so I wouldn't even know how to respond to that. But if that happened, what happens next?
Well, I don't know. I think what you hear from senior leaders talking about is just inadvertent launch of something like that, because the conflict was going in such a direction that nobody had the intention to do it, but because there was a mistake somewhere, then it led to something like that. But it's so hard to play those out, and I'm glad I don't have to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's obviously, as a technology provider, this is definitely not my area. It's something that all of us in society probably think about, though. I mean, anyone who's like watching the news is definitely thinking about it because we all have kids and stuff.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, pretty much why I'm here is because I think this is like the issue of our time right now, and I just think that with the way all of the governments around the world are kind of like losing control in some respects to the people. I don't know if you ever read The Revolt of the Public. No. Did you ever pull up The Revolt of the Public? Yeah, it's basically just like showing that like, I mentioned like the war gaming. It's not really done by us. Obviously, it's done by people, senior leadership in government. But The Revolt of the Public posits effectively, if I see if I get this right, but like, now anyone has a voice and can go direct to the people, and there are like a lot of really smart people out there that are like offering their opinions, and it's catching on.
Yeah.
And so like governments typically, like before the digital age, we didn't really have that kind of like people having such a large megaphone.
Yep.
And so that's like the book goes through a lot of these examples and kind of takes you through like how it's affecting government and government decisions, that the public now has such a large voice that they didn't have before.
And you can definitely find the sources of information that you want to support kind of where you're already leaning. I suspect this is X, Y, and Z is happening. I'm sure you can find an expert somewhere that agrees with that. And you're like, hey, see?
Yeah. So anyways, I think I recommend this. This is a pretty good book, though.
When I first started in the drone office down at SOCOM, Ukraine wasn't happening. Obviously, October 7th wasn't happening in Israel. Both those conflicts have just escalated how quickly, in terms of unmanned systems, is maturing. I think had neither of those events happened, the U.S. could have kind of plugged along in terms of, systems to counter those at a more deliberate pace. But, things are changing on a monthly basis, and not just even the technologies, how they employ the technologies, to get around our systems. I think startups are uniquely postured to be responsive to that. The department's just going to have to figure out how they work with companies like us to accelerate those.
One of our big advantages is that there were no requirements for our product when we started. That's actually, it's a double-edged sword. But like we talk about this a lot. But for the viewers who want to start a startup in defense, you can learn from me. We were ahead, and there's no requirement for a gun that points and shoots itself. Like every gun that exists is basically joystick operated for the most part to get at least close to the target before you press the button, and then some of them try to auto target. But this sort of AI gun is very far into the future. which is it's a startup advantage. I mean, and that's with the venture community. They weren't really investing before Anduril started in 2017 into this space. But I think what a lot of investors found out is that, wow, we can front run a lot of future requirements and get the startups working now because it's stuff is obviously coming. Anyone can see that humans can't be shooting at drones. They're never going to hit them with their gun.
Yeah.
And so this is a good example. There's many others, but you can just front run 3 to 4 years of the requirements gathering process and the product can be done before, a lot of it's ever written.
Yeah, and I've heard a number of people in the VC space say that if you've waited until DoD has a requirement, you're too late.
Yeah.
I would say there's kind of two VC-backed companies that I saw. Either ones that think they can make a better product than their competitors, or the product doesn't exist. ACS is in that space where not only do we do it better than anybody else, there's nobody else in that space. And I think that's where a lot of startups struggle, is that if it's already a fairly crowded market space for the technology they're delivering, it's really an uphill battle with the department. Probably just as good as anybody leaving government. I had a very good idea of what solutions we had and didn't have that were successful and what could deal with certain threats. And it was very easy to see, the on-ramp to what we're building here at ACS across different services and just ahead of need, not too far ahead of need, but just ahead of need, which was really exciting.
Yeah. What you said, there's the two camps. There was the ones that were building something. What were they again?
It was, one camp says, hey, I can come in and I can build a better thing than the competitors that are already in the space, right? Or
a better mousetrap, basically.
Yep. A better electric vehicle, whatever it might be, a better, electronic warfare solution, or I can look for a market space that there are no competitors.
Yeah.
And I am so confident in our capabilities that we can be first to market, not lose.
Yeah. There is, in the first camp, the one advantage of a company in that camp, obviously it's crowded, but the market's been validated, which is nice.
True.
So then it just becomes is it actually 10 times better? It has to be 10 times better. I think that's the key. And making something 10 times better in defense is pretty hard.
Yep.
I think that's a step change better, a big step change better. You see that right now with the Anduril launched Barracuda.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be 10 times better than existing cruise missiles? I'm not sure. I think we're going to find out. But that's kind of what they would posit, basically. It's better, it's cheaper.
For some on the government, I would think, and I'm in this camp, that the intellectual bet on Anduril is that initially it may not be better, but we know that they have historically, or they have demonstrated they've got the talent to make it better than everybody else.
Yeah.
And so they're in a unique position that a lot of other companies don't find themselves.
I guess that's why government's more willing to give them a shot. They've been attracting a lot of talent, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
At the idea.
Yeah, I mean, for any company, at least on the government side, where what we were looking at was the talent that were in the companies. Can they really deliver the product that's there? And working at a Shield AI or Palantir or Anduril, I would imagine for young engineers coming out of school, some really smart ones, when it became more in vogue to work at a defense contractor, this is where I want to go.
How well do you know Shield AI stuff? What's your Shield?
I don't.
Okay. What about the CCA? Have you been following the CCA?
A little bit, just, some of the articles will pop up now and again.
Do you follow the CCA Drama?
No, not recently.
Jack, pull up the CCA Drama. Do General Atomics, Palmer Luckey fight. You haven't seen this?
No.
This is the best news of last week in defense. I mean, this is phenomenal. I don't see it. Before their CCA drones even take to the air, Anduril and General Atomic trade shots. So this first picture here is the Fury, I believe. That's Fury?
No,
that's Fury. Is that Anduril's logo on the middle?
On the bottom one.
Oh yeah, the bottom one.
Yep.
The top one is the General Atomics. The difference, from some of the differences that I'm aware of, the General Atomics one has the payload inside of it.
Okay.
Comes out of the bay.
Interesting.
Whereas the Anduril one, you're supposed to affix them to the bottom.
Well, it's just less moving parts, right?
Yeah. Scroll down. So we've got, scroll down. Gotta get to the tweet, obviously. Oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, General Atomics spokesman C. Mark Brinkley called Anduril the Theranos of defense.
Wow. That's
referring
harsh.
to the much-hyped but ultimately hollow promises from a tech firm. First of all, I take offense to that because there are no that's like really fucked up. I mean, obviously Anduril should probably sue them for like, what is it, libel or slander? Defamation. I mean, that's pretty aggressive, right?
Yeah, I don't think Anduril cares one bit what they say.
Yeah. So hold on, we got to see the response. You got to see the response. Maybe you're wrong. You might have just walked yourself into a trap. So we got Bro's response. We don't make a habit of trash talking our competitors. There's that. So that's pretty good measured response, right?
Yeah.
But it gets better. Palmer Luckey was not so measured.
But you would expect that from Chris Bros.
Yeah.
That's
and then from Palmer, you've got him, posting that.
Doth Bros has too much.
Yeah. I mean, there's a battle going on here.
Of course. Yeah, this is the future of, where the Air Force
this is
going.
Big money, too. So, like, there's a battle here.
It's also the opportunity for Anduril to make a big splash on a major weapon system program. You know.
So you haven't followed it at all, really. Then I've been really fiending on CCA news.
Yeah, just more from the outside because I know this was an effort that they really wanted to go after because we were managing their contract with SOCOM.
So dark horse here, though. You know how this works. Like, so Lockheed's still in it, though. The down select was to those two for this increment 1.
Yeah.
But increment 2 is open for everyone again. And so Lockheed's coming in. They say they've got something better than both of those. That's 70% cheaper.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. First of all, that seems like it's very too cheap. But that could be, it's the classic strategy.
Sure.
Be like, well, hey, look, they can mess around with increment 1, but big boy Lockheed says, no, we're going to go low on the price, get the win, maybe jack it up later.
Well, that's kind of the MO, right?
So will the government bite or no? That's the real question.
I don't think there's anybody naive on the government side that...
I think they've been through it so many times, the customer knows. Like they can see a price that's too low.
Yeah, or it's so low, what are the technology trade-offs? Like, hey, if I want a cheap, autonomous aircraft, then what am I giving up?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's what the Air Force is going for here.
As a gambler, I love to gamble, as you know. I really want a Have you ever used Polymarket? You ever seen that?
No.
Polymarket's like the election betting site.
Oh.
So it's like it like shows basically like it predicted like hours before Biden dropped out. It like went to 100 basically.
Okay.
This is actually good. This is my idea for another defense tech startup. So the world's largest prediction market. People say now that this is kind of the news. Like this predicts the news before the news drops because it's a betting market. So it's the wisdom of the crowd. Imagine a poly market for programs of record. So basically, like, when's the CCA really going to get selected? It's probably like 2 years from now, 2 or 3. Yeah. So you can see, like, the wisdom of the people can bet which firm's going to win, and the wisdom of the crowd, it'll be more accurate than even people in the government know. Effectively.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about things so they're highly affected by, public sentiment, and most of these awards are not.
No, exactly. They're not. The awards aren't at all.
Yeah.
But it's like this is where gamblers can go to gamble.
Oh.
So like basically you could be like, I want to put money on Lockheed, Anduril. I want to put money on General Atomics. Like they do it for the election. Why not for programs of record?
Yeah. I mean, for publicly traded companies, I guess you could do that, in the market.
Well, I mean, this would just be like the crowd betting. So it's not like anyone has insider info. Like it's not like we have any insider. Sure. We have no idea.
If there weren't enough places to bet money, to lose money, I don't have anyways. So.
No, don't have yet. Well, the other thing is, I don't know. Have you been following sports betting recently? Like all the news on like people will be like, we made a huge mistake legalizing this.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, it's terrible.
I don't know why they thought it was a good idea. Gambling was already a problem to begin with.
I mean, doing it on your phone is so ridiculous. Like, my wife and I talk about this all the time. You should have to drive to the casino or travel there. It should be painful.
Yep.
Because it's too easy now.
Yeah.
And the results are horrible. I mean, they've shown like domestic violence is up on this. Sure. It's like, I think they're going to have to reverse course. Like the government is, because I think that was a big mistake. Yeah. It's just too easy. It's too addictive. It's too social. And the advertising for it is everywhere. You can't watch football anymore without being like, FanDuel.
Yep.
The ads are just down your throat.
And it's like hyper accelerated people that were, betting on games through like a, under the table bookie. I mean, I remember kids in college that would like run up these massive debts because it wasn't on their phone, but they could just call the guy on their, on their analog phone and be like, I want to, place this bet. And they'd be betting money they don't have. And it just compounds, right?
Yeah.
Now you have it on your phone. You can do it anywhere.
Yeah. I wanted to make an argument for why I think the poly market would be good for the programs of record, though. Boardrooms. Like, imagine you're in the General Atomics boardroom, and you might be pretty far removed from the team actually working on the CCA. And if you pull up that poly market in the morning, you're like, man, it says 60% chance Anduril is winning this thing. I need to look into this. I think it's good info for the execs. I do. I know I'm like out there on a limb. I'm the crazy one, but I do think it's a great idea for a defense tech company to start this betting site for programs of record.
I can just picture the mandatory training already for every government employee why you can't go do this.
You cannot give any information to people betting on poly market.
Yeah.
Well, they can't give any information anyway. It's not like they could give any.
No, but like if you had inside info,
they can't bet
on it. Just like you can't invest, if you're on a program, you can't invest in a company.
Oh, God. Actually, that's a good point. Like, you can't bet on the poly market.
It'd be at least a semi-annual mandatory training, some like 300-page PowerPoint brief that you have to scroll through.
Yeah, I think there's probably also like national security concerns with this because, if we're giving our enemies like information on which team's going to win, I'm sure they could like use cyber attack, like they could focus more on that company. So I think it's probably not good for national. Maybe it's actually a horrible idea, but it's something that, poly market's illegal in the U.S.
Oh,
like
really?
it's set over, like the company's headquartered overseas.
Oh, okay.
Because you're not allowed to actually bet on elections like this.
Mm.
Yeah. So this company would have to be, maybe our adversaries would start the poly market for program of record because it's definitely not legal here. You can only bet on sports and like horses, and there's a very narrow set of things you can bet on.
He just gave Russia's cyber group an idea.
Yeah, right. I gave him a terrible idea. Yeah. You guys should totally do this. Yeah, guys, spend all of your, instead of doing like psyops on our people, try to make this stupid website.
Yeah,
really,
sure.
this is actually, it's disinformation I'm giving them. I mean, I'm sure they're all tuning into the Drone Wars podcast for this info. All right, cool. So what's on? So now, I guess to wrap kind of, the last topic here, startup life.
Yeah.
So you're here now, your first startup.
Yep.
You've picked a great one.
Mm-hmm.
What are like the most exciting? Like it's so different than the government, right? Already. Does it feel different?
Yeah. Well, I've had a number of people ask me, how did you, for the ones that I know that know that I've come here, how did you make that decision? When you guys came and talked to me at Soft Week, and then we later had discussions about, potential opportunities, there were other offers that were on the table for other companies, but it wasn't anything I was passionate about. I mean, everybody leaving the service is like, you've got to find some kind of purpose in life and passionate. I'm lucky because this kind of fit all those needs. One, I'm transitioning into a market space that I already know very well. Like I don't really have to learn the technology, at least at the level that I need to articulate. But it's going to fill a need that the U.S. has. It's not like I'm trying to sell something to the government that they really don't want. It's just finding the right avenue to get this on and the right champion. So far it's been good. But I think I kind of found the needle in the haystack, or you guys came and found it. I don't remember what it was.
I saw a LinkedIn post by you that you were retiring.
Oh, yeah.
And then I looked you up and saw your background, and I was like, wow, what a great fit.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I have to go for this, obviously. So thanks, Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn founder, for making this sweet website. Now, I do think about this a lot, by the way, which is before the internet, like what was it like to build a business in the 80s without the internet? Like I would have never found you or like Mike or any of the team members in the same way. Like I wouldn't have, you're a very perfect hire for us, perfect fit. And it would have just been so much different in like just with the phone, the old phones.
I think you end up, right now you've got the opportunity to have such a diverse workforce in terms of experiences because you've got that access to all those people. I would imagine, in the 80s, it's really only your network and how small that is.
I know. So it's wild. So anyway, so I was fortunate enough to use the power of social media.
Yeah.
That's a social media success story. I know people shit on social media a lot. That's one of the positives of it. But yeah, so now, obviously that businesses, unlike the government, can die. Well, I guess governments can too, but not really. Not ever really. Like it's hundreds of years till a government, maybe thousands. But a business, could have a shorter lifespan, a little bit more pressure. So are you feeling the pressure yet? Have I put it on you yet?
Sure, right? There's a finite amount of resources, but we've talked about this. I wish you, Mike, and Luke, and everybody in the companies had my context of all these meetings that I've sat in with hundreds of companies, and how hard it is for any of them just to get like an audience with the program office. The fact that we have got a number of services and program offices that are like, I'm really interested in this. Here's how we want to bring you on, or I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it, but this is really cool, is a very unique place for most companies to be in, especially startups. And, while it hasn't necessarily materialized yet, into a contract, all those conditions are there for that to happen very quickly. I would say 99.9% of companies and startups are not in that place. It takes them a very, very long time to get there, or not at all.
Yeah, which is why they usually come from a commercial side, because they can live long enough. It's very exciting for me too. In the restaurant tech world, it would take me a couple of weeks to get a customer. Obviously, this takes longer.
Yeah.
It's a much different type of customer. I kind of love the uncertainty though. It's exciting for me.
Yeah.
To feel something.
I can see where it's frustrating, especially for anybody coming outside of the defense industry, especially when you've achieved the level of success that you guys have. Sale techniques still apply, but it's frustrating when you go talk with somebody, but they don't have the authority necessarily to make the decision, which I would imagine. And, when you had meetings with your other company, it was like, I'm talking to people that can make the decision right now, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to go.
And then I can be like, I'm not leaving the room till you do make the decision, or get the deal at all costs. It's a different type. I think for me, what's exciting is it's just a different type of sales cycle.
Sure.
It's a partnership. It's more of a true partnership because the government's going to definitely change the requirements a little bit on what we've built. And then it's obviously a longer sales cycle. It's for a much bigger, more important mission. There's just a lot more things that are more exciting about this than the restaurant world. And it's kind of reminding me back to when I was in the Navy and why I liked the Navy so much. Yeah, and the challenge is cool. It's different, and I think that it's like solving a puzzle in many ways.
And what's cool in the space that we're in is we're in the very nascent stages of what unmanned system threats are going to look like. The department's going to have to invest in this in perpetuity. And I made this statement before, is typically programs, the way that we want to resource programs in the U.S. government is we're going to spend some research dollars, we're going to procure it, spend some procurement dollars, we're going to focus in, and then we're going to put a bunch of sustainment dollars after we have fielded it to the warfighters. So now all that money that was procurement and research dollars we can put towards other programs, both in partnership with Congress and how the department budgets. It's going to have to be a sustained investment in perpetuity. I don't see this threat ever going away anytime in the near future, and it's constantly going to change.
That's a great place to end it. Thanks,
Yep.
Brice.